Civic Center TV with our brand new live captions. To turn on live captions, go to civiccentertv.com and click Watch Live. In your web browser, click on the Options tab in the top right and find the Accessibilities tab. Then just switch on live captions to heighten your enjoyment of our local programming. Thank you so much for watching Civic Center TV. Like what you see? Beautiful works of art, masterworks of metal, and accomplishments of artistry will be on display near you. All kinds of artists from all walks of life come together to celebrate their skill and appreciate their work's beauty. Hot Works presents the 2023 Orchard Lake Fine Art Show. Stop by July 29th and 30th between 2 and 10 p.m. between Powers and Daly off of Orchard Lake Road.
You're listening to your radio homes for the Megacast, 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. Today's edition of the Megacast begins now. Welcome to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. You can always find us Monday through Friday throughout our local communities on Civic Center TV and on a number of other community television and radio stations here in Oakland County and throughout the state of Michigan from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. as well as in other places live to tape throughout the rest of the morning, the afternoon, the evenings, and even over the weekend. CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast is the place to go to find all the information you need to know about where we're airing in your local community and where you can find us on demand. Full episodes and each individual segment from each and every version of our show, Monday through Friday, dating all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020. Keep up to date on the latest that's happening here in Oakland County, things that are happening nationally and statewide and even globally, and how they affect us here in Oakland County and more. Really interesting show ahead. We'll talk a little bit about mental health and anxiety, particularly in adults later on in the show. And of course, it is Wednesday. It is Politics Day here on the Megacast at the bottom of the hour, just around 10:40 this morning. We'll talk the latest in Michigan and national politics with Dave Dulio from Oakland University. But before we get to all that, let's go to our top stories making news today on our local news page on CivicCenterTV.com, where each and every day before our program, we will link you to the top stories from around the Metro Detroit area and statewide that are affecting us here in Oakland County and in your hometown as well. Our top story this morning comes from Marina Johnson and Nora Rahal at the Detroit Free Press. With wildfires continuing in Quebec and Ontario, Canada, they continue to have an effect on air quality right here in Oakland County and throughout the state of Michigan. Over the past couple of days, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE, has issued air quality alerts, and those are continuing on this Wednesday morning and will continue on to at least throughout the evening tonight on this Wednesday in Michigan. While smoke has been at its most dense in the Upper Peninsula, it has not spared the Lower Peninsula from some of the similar effects in terms of air quality, with the city of Detroit and our local area continuing to have abnormally low air quality and hazy sky conditions in recent days. In fact, IQ Air's Air Quality Index currently has Detroit ranked as having the second worst air quality in the entire world, only followed by our close neighbors to the west in the Midwest in Chicago, and right in the range of other worldwide ranking low air quality nations and areas such as Baghdad, Iraq, as well as Beijing, China, coming in at third and fourth worst in the world. Elevated levels of particulate matter are once again the main culprit in the skies in terms of why the air quality is so low here in Metro Detroit, leading the National Weather Service's local and state and other statewide branches to advise Southeast Michiganders to quote, keep windows closed overnight and to prevent smoke from getting indoors, and if possible, run central air conditioning with MERV 13 or higher rated filters in your system. If you have the ability also to expand on that and recirculate the air that's inside of your home, that may also be a good idea. Same thing in your cars. If you're running AC as you're driving around this morning here in the greater West Bloomfield area across Oakland County, or listening to us online on lakesfm.com or on WBFH.FM at this time as you're driving around, the Biff radio app, another place you can listen to us. If you're doing that and you're driving, you got the air conditioning on right now, maybe best to put that on to recirculation so that you're not getting that lower quality air from outside with all the haziness going through your filters, putting more tax on those filters, and then on top of that, potentially getting some of that particulate matter into your vehicle. If you recirculate that air, it'll continue to just cool what is inside your vehicle. Another good tip for today. These conditions are not, of course, ideal for Michiganders of any kind, but especially those that have respiratory conditions. We're talking asthma, we're talking emphysema, other breathing issues, especially if you're going to be outside for a prolonged period. Children are also at elevated risk of symptoms today as a result of the lower air quality of the particulate matter that is in our area of the atmosphere this morning and will be throughout the day. So it may not be the most drastic idea for safety precautions to keep them home from camp today or other activities that would mostly have them outdoors if those are not adjusting to the air quality and moving their systems and their programs indoors, especially if your kids have asthma or are more sensitive to being outside in the warm air. It may actually be worse today because of the air quality here in the state of Michigan. The National Weather Service has issued air quality advisories for the following counties in lower Michigan: Wayne, Macomb, Washtenaw, Lenawee, Monroe, Lapeer, St. Clair, Livingston, Genesee, and right here in Oakland County. In addition, Shiawassee, Sanilac, Tuscola, Saginaw, Huron, Midland, and Bay counties also under this air quality advisory. Still under effect from earlier on in this week and continuing to be in effect until at least Wednesday night today. Could continue to have some hazy conditions out there. Looking out my window here in western Oakland County, not as bad right now. Clear skies, doesn't seem all too hazy outside, but you could definitely tell last night I got home a little bit later than I normally would on most days back into my area of town after going in for some work at the studio at Civic Center TV. And you could definitely tell as you looked over Walled Lake as I drove into western Oakland County, or was driven into western Oakland County. You could definitely see a little bit of that haze from what light was outside over the lake and over the roads. Definitely last night and throughout Tuesday, low air quality in this area. That's still going to be in the forecast for today as the remainder of that smoke that's been filing into the state of Michigan from Quebec as well as from Ontario shifts its way out of the state of Michigan. Hopefully that air quality will be upped in the coming days. It is also noted by the National Weather Service, and it's a fair point, it's a very good point, that maybe today is a good day to take a breather from other outdoor activities and projects at your home. If you're going to be in your garden today, maybe limit the time you're outdoors, go in different pockets of time today instead of spending 3 hours at the garden or 3 hours doing yard work today at one given time. Maybe go out for a half hour at a time several times throughout the day to limit your prolonged exposure to the particulate matter, and especially to help with the air quality alert, with the ozone action day alert that's been put into place by certain organizations as a result of this particulate matter from the smoke from these fires in Canada. May also be a good idea to take a day off and maybe let your lawn grow out one more day longer and wait until either Thursday or even over this long weekend to take care of some of those projects that may require you to use gas-powered vehicles like your lawn mowers, your riding mowers, weed whackers, and other materials outdoors, which could also affect the air quality in your local community. More information can be found on these wildfires, how they're affecting air quality in Detroit and the metro area at this time, from our friends at the Detroit Free Press, our top story this morning on CivicCenterTV.com's local news page. Also making news this morning on our local news page from Peg McNichol at the Oakland Press on this hump day as you are stocking up to celebrate the nation's independence on the water over the weekend. Don't forget the plan to do so safely and respectfully, and of course, responsibly, as the Oakland County Sheriff's Marine Patrol will be out in greater numbers this holiday weekend patrolling the county's waterways for bad actors who are having a few too many with Uncle Sam. It's all part of a national effort running July 1st through 3rd to reduce drug and alcohol-related incidents on the water, known as Operation Dry Water. Sheriff Bouchard told the Oakland Press he's seen it all in these sorts of incidents that happen on the water, both on holiday weekends and all throughout the generalized boating seasons, from kayakers going too close to local dams and potentially setting themselves up for capsizing, for injury, or for both. Kids falling in the pools while parents are distracted and struggling to swim, even in some cases, unfortunately, drowning. To the unfortunate accidents that happen because of distracted or worse off, intoxicated boat operators on any of our many lakes here in Oakland County. Thus, there's going to be more enforcement. I'm looking at you party animals out on the sandbar in Cass Lake and Keego Harbor. I've worked with Ronnie Dahl. She's told me some stories. It gets wild out there sometimes, especially on these holiday weekends. So be careful, be responsible, be respectful, and hopefully you will do so even more so this holiday weekend with greater enforcement expected from the Marine Patrol throughout Oakland County through the Oakland County Sheriff's Office. A quick sip and we'll continue on. As Oakland County is actually a big sticking point in Michigan's arm of Operation Dry Water, given that Oakland County has the most registered boats of any county in the state of Michigan. 83 counties in the state of Michigan. Oakland County is number 1 in terms of registered boats. 83,000 registered right here in Oakland County, as well as some of the most extensive lakeland in the state of Michigan. 450 navigable lakes throughout this county. All the more reason why it's going to be a little bit greater enforcement you'll see over the weekends. People are having fun, getting out on their boats, recreating, celebrating the nation's independence. Sheriff Michael Bouchard says that this effort is not about ruining your fun this 4th of July weekend. They want to save your party, not end it. Telling the Oakland Press, quote, "We want the holiday to be a safe one, no matter whether you're behind the wheel of a car or operating a boat. Don't drink alcohol and drive. Protect yourself, your family, and your friends." Lots of times people consume a great deal of alcohol and don't realize that that diminishes your capabilities on the boat the same way it does when you are driving a car. Boaters need to be patient after refueling as well, says Sheriff Bouchard. If they want to get back out on the water, get back to having fun, but as they're refueling, especially given the conditions we have right now out in the air, some of that fuel, those fumes are still in the air as you're closing up the gas tank for your boat. So before you fire that ignition off, be careful, give it a few seconds, let some of those fumes dissipate, or you could end up turning your party into a little bit more explosive of a party than you probably would like it to be. You want to keep it to be more of a 4th of July vibe, not so much a Michael Bay movie vibe. So that's certainly, and of course for safety reasons, might want to take just a little while before hitting the ignition after you finish refueling your vehicles. Kayakers should also practice and be more proficient in recovering from capsizing and other safety incidents, or take other measures to keep themselves afloat. And I'll move on to some other just general safety precautions that also include those that are going to be on boaters. But I'm not trying to rag on boat lovers having a good time on the water this holiday season. I am ragging now on you parents who take an eye off your kids at the beach and at the pool. Keep an eye out for your kids. They're your responsibility. Even if they know how to swim, keep an eye on them. Things can happen. They can maybe pass out because of the heat. They could trip and fall and not notice that they're in the that they're about to fall into the water. Get injured, not be able to communicate with you that they're in the water, or panic simply and not be able to swim to their capability and put themselves in danger of drowning or other injuries. So they're preventable mostly with supervision and also with flotation devices. Whether you're on a boat or not, if you're not sure about your kid's ability to swim, floaties are always a good idea on their arms and maybe even on their legs to keep them afloat in the water, even with supervision. And of course, on boats, life jackets for everybody on board, whether they're able to swim or not, to keep them safe in case anybody does fall off of the boat for any number of reasons this holiday season, trying to keep everybody safe. And hey, if you do a head count and the head count from when you got out on the water is different from when you're trying to head back in, maybe look around, make sure everybody is where they're supposed to be or where they're said they were going before heading back to shore. So again, if you're out on the water this holiday season, this holiday weekend, you're likely to see the Marine patrols from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office in some greater numbers as part of this national Operation Dry Water effort. According to the Oakland Press, they'll be out on the water in many of the communities, and really all the communities that they contract with, as well as some other ones. But among the waterways that you will see the Oakland County Sheriff's Marine Patrol out on this weekend, Cass Lake, as I mentioned, that sandbar, that's a sticky area. That's a tough spot. A lot of party animals out there. You're going to be getting watched by the Marine Patrol this weekend on Cass Lake. Cedar Island Lake, Deer Lake, our friends up in the area of Orion Neighborhood Television on Lake Orion, where living is a vacation. That's going to be another location where we'll see more of the sheriffs, as well as Lower Straits and Upper Long Lake, Lake Sherwood, Pine Lake, Orchard Lake. I mentioned Upper Long Lake, Sylvan Lake, Walled Lake, Walnut Lake, Williams Lake. Pretty much if it ends in lake, you're probably going to see the Oakland County Sheriff's Office this weekend. That full list of places that they are definitely going to be, of different lakes they're going to be on this weekend for sure, is in this article from the Oakland Press. So, bottom line, have a safe Independence Day weekend, rock, flag, and eagle, all of that kind of stuff. We want to see you back here on Wednesday along with us after our long weekend for another week of shows right here on Civic Center TV and throughout our network. That full article from our friends at the Oakland Press on our website this morning, civiccentertv.com. On our local news page. Click through to read the entire article, either on the headline, on the thumbnail picture, or on the link that says click here at the bottom of that story. In addition, making news this morning on our local news page from Bridge, Michigan's U Stella U, as Pride Month inches toward its conclusion this weekend. Leaders in Lansing and in the Michigan Senate have voted in favor to pass new bills banning conversion therapy on LGBTQIA plus individuals in order to attempt to change one's gender identity or expression. House Bills 4616 and 4617 are now on their way to the governor's desk following being passed both in the House and the Senate, where she can sign them into law. Something she is surely likely to do, as this was a significant talking point of her re-election campaign. And in the past, just back in 2021, the governor also took previous action barring state funding from going toward conversion therapy programs altogether. The Great Lakes State, if this is signed into law by Governor Whitmer, and it's presumed that it will become the 22nd state in the union to push through such legislation into the law books, as advocated from both the LGBTQIA plus community and even some in the mental health community and mental health practitioners who have urged public leadership that these practices have significant and even severe mental health effects on younger people, especially in the LGBTQIA plus community, that are enduring this so-called conversion therapy. The bill passed the Senate by a 21-15 vote earlier this week, with most Republicans voting against the bill, arguing for the most part that it forces mental health professionals into going along with efforts for trans youth to complete their transitions while not being of majority age. They don't want minors going through with transitions, claiming they are not responsible enough to do so, and that parents shouldn't have to go through the trials of going through a transition with their kids. Walker, Michigan Republican Mark Huizenga, however, did vote affirmatively for the bill, one of the only Republicans to vote in favor of that bill in the Senate. Again, it's passed in the House, it's passed in the Senate, and now it is going to move on to Governor Whitmer's desk. In response to Senate Republicans' efforts to shut down this bill or pass a separate piece of legislation that would rather encourage discussions on biological sex along with gender identity with young patients, Michigan Senator Mallory McMorrow, a Democrat from Royal Oak, asked, "These are kids. How dare you?" to her colleagues on the other side of the aisle. The governor is yet to sign this bill into law. With the Senate's passage of these House bills, the governor's signature is the final step, of course, in the process to turn these bills into laws. Also making headlines on our local news page this morning from the Detroit News' Kara Berg. The Oakland County prosecutor's team in the trial of the Oxford High School shooters' parents, James and Jennifer Crumbly, brought forth some new evidence this week that alleges a sort of quote-unquote consciousness of guilt on their part in the shooting that killed 4 students at Oxford High School in November of 2021. This is in addition to previously submitted evidence such as text messages from Jennifer Crumbly to her son on the day of the shooting, just shortly after she learned about it on local news, with her colleagues texting him saying, quote, "Don't do it," and close quote. And then later on texting her supervisor at her job, asking her supervisor not to fire her for the actions of her son on that day. Of note in these newly publicized pieces of evidence was that James Crumbley had the receipt for the gun that he had purchased for his then 15-year-old son that was used to injure and kill his peers in his pocket while he was arrested in the days following the massacre while on the run, so to speak, in Detroit. Prosecutor McDonald did note this, did note that receipt being in his pocket, as well as connecting that to both of the Crumbley parents fleeing to a building in Detroit when they were scheduled to turn themselves in the days following the shooting and their son's arrest. They were then arrested at that location during that timeline back in 2021. Currently, both of the shooter's parents are charged with multiple counts of involuntary manslaughter in the base of the 4 students killed and 6 students and a teacher injured on November 30th, 2021 at Oxford High School at the hands of their son. The lawyers for James and Jennifer Crumbley argue on the opposite side that the prosecutors have not been able to provide enough evidence to show a jury that they are their clients were negligent in their son's mental health state and potential to be a danger to the public, claiming it was their son's action and only their son's actions that were the sole cause of the shooting, not the alleged action or inaction alleged on that part of the shooter's parents. The parents remain on trial for involuntary manslaughter at this time. No current indication of when that trial may be concluding. Finally, making headlines this morning on our local news page from MLive's Ben Orner. With one stroke of the pen, Governor Gretchen Whitmer can now make alcohol sales at college sporting events legal in the state of Michigan. The Michigan House of Representatives passed the bill on an 85-23 margin, as well after a passage of 36-2 in the Senate earlier this month, that would lift the current ban on selling alcohol at college sporting events. Not necessarily at college stadiums, but at college sporting events in those stadiums. It should be noted that events such as when Real Madrid soccer played at the Big House in Ann Arbor, alcohol sales were permitted there because it was a professional event, not a college event. The NCAA, which oversees most college sporting events, including both MSU and Michigan football and basketball games, as well as other sports, lifted their alcohol sales ban in 2019, and currently 11 of the 14 Big Ten schools do permit alcohol sales at their stadiums for many sporting events. Perhaps in the coming days, we can add MSU and U of M, along with the Big House and the now 100-year-old and frankly, more superior Spartan Stadium, to the list of Big Ten stadiums for football and other sports that will be added to the list of Big Ten facilities where you can buy alcohol during and shortly after these games. Senate Bill 247 will not just apply to the 2 biggest colleges in Michigan, however, but rather all 15 public universities across the state, allowing the governing boards of these institutions to then pursue an alcohol license if they so choose to do so. This wouldn't say that these stadiums or that these universities, these institutions have to sell alcohol at all or even any of their sporting events. It simply would give them the permission to pursue an alcohol license to be able to sell beer and other alcohol in their stadiums should they choose to do so. Advocates in favor of this legislation say that it will help reduce binge drinking on the days of these games. You think about these football tailgates in Ann Arbor and in East Lansing and even in other communities like Ypsilanti or Kalamazoo that also have quite the excited fan bases there. Less binge drinking on the day of these sporting events. Reduced underage drinking, as those that may be wanting to drink alcohol in the stadium will of course be carded by vendors in order to confirm their age, and will also increase safety outcomes. Less people walking around inebriated on game days, potentially putting themselves or others in danger at the stadiums or on campus on the day of these sporting events. Those who are arguing against this bill or arguing out of favor of these permissions say that these sort of outcomes won't necessarily move the needle all that far in terms of safety in preventing binge drinking or underage drinking outcomes, saying that the changes may be marginal at best, and that if people are going to drink underage, they're probably going to drink underage before they get into the stadium, knowing that they would be carded there, and that in terms of binge drinking, it really shouldn't be on the conscience or on the decision-making of those that are working as vendors to decide when someone has had too many. That should be more of a personal responsibility model, and it may not always work to hold those individuals responsible and cut them off if they've had a few too many. Should the bill become law, alcohol sales at these stadiums would be permitted 1 hour before and 30 minutes after all sporting events until further notice, and drinks would not be allowed to be taken outside of the stadium. So you purchase a beer at Spartan Stadium, before you leave and head back out onto the roads in East Lansing, you would not be able to, you have to dispose of that alcohol inside the stadium. Same goes for you folks in Ann Arbor at the Big House. Where may you see drinks for sale in the near future if this bill is signed into law by Governor Whitmer? Well, we have seen both Eastern Michigan, Oakland University, and Western Michigan University all indicate in the past that they are in support of this legislation, and based on revenue sales that could potentially come from selling alcohol at football and basketball games, you would have to presume that the University of Michigan and Michigan State University would also be exploring these options should the governor sign this into law. You can find this full article from MLive as well as all of our top stories this morning on our local news page on civiccentertv.com, as well as all of our top stories throughout the week. We will keep these articles up on our page all the way through next week when we kick off our new editions of the shows and reload articles in there for our top stories making headlines next week. CivicCenterTV.com on our local news page. They have brief little snippets of these articles, and you click through on either the headline, on the thumbnail picture that goes along with the story, or a little link at the bottom of each of these stories that says click here or by clicking here. And that will take you to these full articles. While you're there reading these full articles, reading the more additional materials that they provide for additional context or connected stories, if you have the means to do so, we highly encourage you to subscribe to these publications and support local journalism and local journalists telling the stories of our communities each and every day here in Oakland County and all throughout the state of Michigan. We have a great program ahead on this Wednesday edition of the Megacast. Coming up next, we'll talk about how anxiety has been taking a greater toll on adults 19 to 64, adults both young and into their elderly age. How is it affecting these individuals, and why primary care providers are being advised at this time to screen for anxiety at your yearly medical checkups. We'll be joined by Lori Edelstein from the Birmingham Maple Clinic after this break. Stay tuned. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
Looking for a midweek meal? Keep the bag lunch at home this summer and enjoy street food in your neighborhood with Food Truck Tuesdays. Enjoy cuisine from around Michigan outside the WB Parks and Recreation Activity Center with a different vendor every Tuesday, like Vegged Out on July 11th. All summer, every Tuesday, Food Truck Tuesday. This community update from Civic Center TV and 89.3 Lakes FM.
There are many different kinds of noses. Our noses can sniff out all kinds of things. Good things and bad things. Your nose knows if those sniffles are just a cold, allergies, or COVID-19. So swab it. Test it. It's good to know.
I don't know why you're so sad. You've got a roof over your head.
You gotta stop with that depression stuff.
That's what white people think.
You alright?
It just feels like it's coming from everywhere.
Do you want to talk about it?
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. As always, you can stay up to date with us on CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast, where you'll find links to all of our partnering stations joining us live Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. throughout our local area, and as well joining us live to tape throughout the state of Michigan each and every day during our regular work week. CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast, that's also the place to go for our latest episodes, both in their entirety and individual segments on demand, so you can watch us anytime from anywhere. CivicCenterTV.com/Megacast. Well, we know over the course of the last several years with the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health has been taking a greater focus in our communities, and thankfully has had less of a stigma surrounding it. And as we've taken more examination into our mental health in our local communities, statewide, nationally, and around the world, now actually American medical advisors are advising primary care providers to begin screening adults 19 to age 64 for anxiety at their regular medical checkups. What does that screening look like? Who should be screened? And what does treatment for anxiety in its many forms look like? Joining us to talk about that and more is Lori Edelstein, a psychotherapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic, on today's edition of the Megacast. Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on. We know that the pandemic has had a number of different mental health effects on people all across the board. One of the most common was anxiety disorders. Is that really the big culprit behind this new recommendation that adults 19 through 64 and some others also get screened for anxiety disorders when they go for their regular checkups?
My guess is that it was really the most significant factor because there's been such an increase in the diagnosis of anxiety among adults in the U.S. Certainly, it has been a significant mental health problem long before COVID, but COVID really exacerbated the situation and ramped up our awareness of how prevalent it is in the U.S. I will say, too, that they've also recommended screening for depression, not just for anxiety, but both.
Yeah, this was a recommendation that was made earlier this week on Tuesday by the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force in the Journal of the American Medical Association for Primary Care Providers. And it's interesting because anxiety isn't a one-size-fits-all disorder. It manifests itself in so many different ways. And so with that being the case, how do anxiety disorders typically get diagnosed in patients and then ultimately lead them into some form of treatment?
Sure. So the most common symptom of an anxiety disorder is worry, but persistent, serious worry that does not abate, that is present for at least 2 weeks constantly, but often it can be present for years. And it's not just run-of-the-mill worry, which we all experience. It's more severe than that. Very often it's focused on specific things like germs or dying or safety or actually specific bodily functions. People also often have fears about vomiting or fears about choking or not being able to breathe without medical explanations for having those disorders at all. It's more or less a worry that's in their head and that persists and impacts their ability to function in other areas of their life.
And it doesn't just affect them mentally or affect them emotionally. Anxiety can have some pretty significant physiological effects as well.
Absolutely. So there are also very typically somatic symptoms, body symptoms. They can include breathing issues, heart rate issues, sweating issues, feeling extremely fatigued or unable to sleep. I mean, it can go either way. Appetite issues. Some people actually break out in hives or rashes from stress, and that's related to anxiety. And most commonly we hear about palpitations, trembling, shaking, and profuse sweating.
Especially when anxiety becomes present in someone at a younger age. We think about our kids having gone through the COVID-19 pandemic in and out of school, in and out of the regular socialization and other sort of rites of passage that you typically go through when you are a child or a teen. How can that then provide even more significant effects over the lifetime of someone if they're experiencing anxiety from a young age and it's going untreated?
Well, we know that anxiety has some biologic and genetic piece to it. So very often, if a parent or both parents or grandparents have a history of an anxiety disorder, it's not unusual that a child would be exhibiting signs of an anxiety disorder in their early years. And if we do identify and diagnose an anxiety disorder in childhood, it's very, very important, because most of the time, if that goes untreated and unchecked, it will get worse as the child ages, and they will eventually come to our attention, and we'll be able to trace back symptoms of anxiety into childhood. What we know is if we can diagnose it early, we have a better chance of helping children learn how to better manage their worries, their fears, before they get so profound, before they become so profound that they just feel completely controlled by them. Last year, in June, I think, of 2022, this same medical task force developed criteria to diagnose and assess anxiety symptoms in children over the age of 8. So that's been around for about a year.
We're joined on today's edition of the Megacast by Lori Cannon Edelson, a psychotherapist at the Birmingham Maple Clinic. You can find more information, get in contact with Lori and the other professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic on birminghammaple.com, and join them and us each and every week for our mental health segment, civiccentertv.com/Megacast for more information and all of those past segments, which do include some on this issue of anxiety. For more context, again, on Tuesday, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force recommended in the Journal of the American Medical Association that primary care providers begin asking patients about feelings of anxiety during routine checkups and providing screening for anxiety disorders using questionnaires and other screening methods. And so, Lori, given that anxiety, A, manifests itself in so many different ways, B, affects people of all ages, how typically, as a professional in the mental health sector, do you and other professionals across medicine then screen for anxiety?
So we typically ask all kinds of questions just at an initial phone call. When someone is calling in for therapy, we ask sort of a basic array of questions to determine what it looks like this patient or this person is dealing with. And then at the first visit, at the intake visit, we administer, actually prior to their visit, questionnaires to rule in or rule out the problems of anxiety, depression, other major mood issues, substance abuse. So in the mental health field, we're doing a lot of screening right away, right up front. For medical professions, this is something newer. Some doctors, some primary care and family medicine docs have been screening for anxiety and depression for many years, long before this task force recommended it across the board. They've been sort of ahead of the curve. And now that this is being recommended on a national scale, hopefully all doctors will start screening. They have very brief questionnaires. They're not threatening. They're not difficult. They're paper and pencil questionnaires. You don't have to speak out loud in front of a group of people about symptoms, but it's pretty much a symptom screener. And when the doctors see enough evidence that there are some, positive responses to symptoms, then hopefully they're going to be doing some recommendation in terms of whether they want to refer to a therapist, ask more questions to rule things in or rule out, and consider treatment that would be appropriate for the patient.
A consultation with a therapist, one of the many different ways that anxiety disorders may be treated. What are some other methods that are also used either by mental health professionals, by other clinical professionals, and beyond?
So medications are also very effective in many cases for anxiety, depression, and many other mental health issues. We are also assessing whether there are enough factors to consider an evaluation with a psychiatrist, which would be an evaluation for medication, to see whether medication alone or medication in combination with some form of psychotherapy would be the best way to proceed with treatment for the patient. Very often family history has some of this too.
In terms of outcomes, how does the treatment often help these individuals either cope with their anxiety and live somewhat comfortably despite that being a factor, or at the very best, maybe even eliminate that anxiety by way of helping them develop ways to cope with that so it doesn't affect their daily life?
I don't know the statistics, the current statistics about how often, what is the percentage of effectiveness for adults or children who use therapy and or medication to alleviate symptoms. I only have evidence in my own practice and in the clinic where we have, close to 39 therapists, 4 psychiatrists. We've been in business for 50 years. We've been doing this work for a very long time. And the success rates are pretty profound. Again, I would prefer to look at National Institute of Mental Health statistics. I don't have them at hand to see what the effectiveness rate is for each therapy individually and in combination, medication and therapy.
And so to bring this all together, Lori, for parents especially, as we talked earlier about the effects that anxiety can have on kids across their childhood and then into adulthood, but also for those that are in that 19 to 64 category that the task force is really focusing on with this directive or recommendation for primary care providers. If they're feeling these sort of symptoms that we talked about today, what are some of those first steps you would recommend that they take to get themselves properly screened and hopefully ultimately treated for their anxiety?
So I think they need to talk to the person that they're most comfortable talking with first. That may be a family physician. It may be a psychotherapist. It may be someone in the clergy. It may be someone in their family or at the workplace, to at least see if they can get some idea of a professional that they have been referred to talk about their concerns about their mental health. There are a lot of online mental health services right now. We always prefer that they get a word of mouth recommendation from someone they respect and trust, as opposed to just sort of jumping online and entering this kind of myriad of resources that the efficacy of which we can't yet prove. So that's the first thing I would recommend. I also want to comment about something that this study and these national recommendations are talking about, and that is before the age of 65. And I'm not sure why this study is limited to before the age of 65, because many, many, many adults who are 65 and older are experiencing anxiety and depression at even higher rates than adults between 19 and 64. So we don't want to exclude individuals over the age of 64. We want to make sure that they too realize that their symptoms are real and really do need screening and appropriate treatment. First of all, appropriate attention to determine whether they need treatment or not. But I wouldn't exclude our senior population, which is growing every year, because anxiety and depression is very real for them too.
You can get in contact with the professionals at the Birmingham Maple Clinic to screen for anxiety, to talk about any other mental health ailments that you may be feeling and experiencing each and every day. BirminghamMaple.com is their website for more information. Lori, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to have Lori and other professionals from the Birmingham Maple Clinic on with us each and every week to talk about topics in the mental health sector of our communities right here in Oakland County. Anxiety affecting people of all ages and all different life situations, and it's really interesting to get that take on how it's being diagnosed and how it can be treated for people of all different ages right here in our community, and not just holding that focus on younger people, but also how it affects the elderly in our communities, especially given the loneliness they did experience during the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll take a break on the Megacast. On the other side, Donald Trump was recently named the Man of the Decade by the Oakland County GOP. Plus, how does the incident in Russia from last weekend, the uprising from the Wagner Group, potentially affect our presidential candidates and their viability to get elected in 2024? That's coming up next. Stay tuned. You're watching and listening to the Megacast.
Wondering what to say to someone who's been sexually assaulted or abused?
I believe you. I'm so sorry this happened.
It's not your fault.
Confidential and anonymous help is available at the Michigan Sexual Assault Hotline. Connect with us 24/7. Call 855-VOICES-4 or text 1-866-238-1454 for help. Learn more at michigan.gov/voices4.
Can I ask you a question? Why do you want to get the COVID-19 vaccine?
I don't like getting sick.
The virus will die.
It will be easy to not catch it.
Keep my family safe and keep playing soccer.
Because I love being vaccinated.
What's your hope for everyone?
I hope everybody gets the vaccine.
To keep safe and strong.
Be like happy, having fun everywhere.
Everyone stay safe and hope you get the vaccine.
In the face of COVID-19, staying healthy is important.
And now the same is true in the face of flu.
Influenza has the power to infect millions.
But it's easy to protect yourself, your family, and your community.
The flu vaccine is safe and effective. And with COVID-19 still around,
it's essential. Together we can face flu season head on.
Visit michigan.gov/flu.
Welcome back to the Megacast, our live daily TV, radio, and streaming show talking about all things Oakland County and the state of Michigan. I'm your host, Tyler Kieft. You can always stay up to date with us and our partnering stations from right here in Oakland County and all throughout the state of Michigan on civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Find all of their original programming linked from our website and also all of our full shows and each individual segment on demand anytime, civiccentertv.com/Megacast. Joining us now to talk about the latest in national and worldwide politics and how that impacts us right here in Oakland County is Dave Dulio, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Oakland University, where he also serves as the Director for their Center for Civic Engagement. Dave, thank you as always for being with us.
Hey, good morning, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you on. Some big news over the weekend in Oakland County as even Mother Nature couldn't stop the Oakland County GOP from officially naming Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States, their man of the decade. And so as we take a look back at the last 10 or so years in American politics, and particularly in Oakland County politics, it's been a time of shifting narratives, of shifting politics. Certainly, what sort of impact has Donald Trump had specifically on our local area and our local politics and statewide politics from Oakland County outward?
Well, I think, Donald Trump is one factor in Oakland County's shift that has taken place over the last, certainly more than 10 years, at least back to the turn of the 21st century. But I think, Trump really he didn't hasten it, but he certainly added to the shift that's occurred in Oakland County, with it moving from a very reliable Republican source of votes to one that is to a county that's Democratic, right? We have a Democratic county executive. We have a majority of the county commission elected as Democrats. And we can go back to 2016, obviously Trump's first run for the White House, and he had success here, won the state of Michigan by a very slim margin, but won the state regardless. And, after that, a lot of folks in Oakland County, including those who gave Trump a chance in 2016, fled him very quickly. In 2018, 2020, and 2022, in each of those election cycles, we saw folks who may have voted for Trump initially abandon him and abandon his chosen candidates. The most recent, of course, being the gubernatorial race when Gretchen Whitmer won Oakland County by 145,000 votes. Republicans can't have success statewide if they lose Oakland County by 145,000 votes. They just can't make them up elsewhere.
And in terms of where that future goes, he's still going to have a massive impact in 2024, and win or lose would certainly continue to have a significant impact as we get through the rest of the 2020s and beyond in politics here in Oakland County, outwardly to the state of Michigan, and certainly nationally. In terms of the viability of his campaign, we know that there's been some hits, but also some benefits to his recent charges on the federal level of over 30 charges of mishandling classified and top secret documents. This week, some audio being released to several news outlets of him on the phone talking about his possession of these papers. And so it makes an interesting dynamic here and potentially interesting situation where while he's being tried in the courts for these, the court of public opinion, getting more and more of this evidence leaked to the press, could ultimately put him on trial in his campaign and could potentially be a detractor to him. How may that be the case as more of this evidence comes out? Could it help him even more, or would it presumably hurt him more, depending on how damning that evidence is?
Well, to this point, you make a good point. There have been some positives and negatives, but I think they're actually one and the same. and you mentioned it. He has been able to take advantage of this negative news by playing the victim, and certainly his ardent supporters are not going to leave him because of it. They're likely even more emboldened in their support for the former president, and it's those other ones who are thinking about supporting Trump in the Republican primary or thinking about somebody else, and what do they do with it, right? And I think that those are the key folks, as well as those Trump supporters who aren't maybe as solid in their support, who might be convinced to go another way. And, I think when we see tapes like the one that was leaked, when we see, there's bound to be other stuff that comes out in the coming weeks and months, maybe that starts to chip away at it. But I don't think that we'll see much of any movement until and unless we see more evidence of Trump's electability in the general election be questioned. And I think, we're still at the point where that's not got a whole lot of focus, but if it becomes clear through the rest of this year and early 2024, if Trump is seen as somebody who can't beat either, whatever Democrat. Let's Joe Biden is going to get the Democratic nomination, but if he is seen as somebody who can't beat Biden by a bigger part of the nation, then maybe Republicans start looking somewhere else for somebody who can beat Biden. But what's interesting is I just saw some polling before we hopped on, and enormous majorities. I don't use that word lightly, right? Huge majorities of the Republican primary electorate. Even those folks who think who say that they are not going to support Trump, and those who think that he did something wrong with those documents, even those groups of folks think that the Justice Department is going after him in a political way, right? So if those folks are convinced that it's a political prosecution, just imagine how ardent those true supporters are.
And that's not been anything that's out of the ordinary for what we've seen in recent years with Donald Trump in politics. So whether it's been Republicans in power in the House of Representatives or Democrats in power, of course, Trump being impeached not once but twice while president, and now House Republicans, especially those on the further side of the right side of the aisle, are making threats that they're going to put articles of impeachment forward for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, for Attorney General Merrick Garland, and even as high as for the President of the United States. Does this seem like the way that we are going to be going forward, where if I can't beat your side's candidate, I'm simply just going to impeach them?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that we're going to be in some version of impeachment tit for tat, right? Where we're going to see, and look, it's not like it was never the case before. You know, there were articles of impeachment rumored for George W. Bush. Certainly Bill Clinton was impeached. And maybe that's where it started it, right? With Republicans' impeachment of Bill Clinton in the late 90s. But, you know, certainly I think that there's not a whole lot of cost politically to Republicans who say that they want to impeach, you know, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Attorney General, or even the President of the United States, right? It plays to their base. We are remaining in this period of elected officials, a large number of them playing only to their base, thinking only about their base, not looking for, you know, I'll say pragmatic or middle of the road solutions that independent voters, that moderate voters are looking for.
Joining us on today's show, as always, to talk about the latest in Michigan and national politics is Dave Dulio, distinguished professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as the director for their Center for Civic Engagement. More information, especially as we get into 2024's presidential primaries and the general election, oakland.edu/CCE. And Dave, before we go today, I want to talk about what happened last weekend in Russia, the uprising from the Wagner Group and Prigozhin, and how that may impact our candidates, particularly in the primary season. Being able to manage international relations, especially with adversaries like Russia, it's been something that's already been a talking point. But now after this, how much more of a sticking point does that become for candidates, particularly on the Republican side where there's a competitive primary, but really across the board?
Yeah, you know, I'm not so sure that the failed coup in Russia is going to be that important in the Republican primary. Had it taken longer to fizzle, or had it been successful, I think it would have been a front burner, top of mind issue. But because it lasted seemingly, you know, a day and a half, I don't think you're going to see much of it. I think the bigger question is going to be about aid to Ukraine and how candidates tackle that question, whether or not they think we should continue the aggressive aid that's been flowing from the United States, or whether it's time to back off on that. I think you're going to see varied and very different responses from the GOP primary candidates. You know, we certainly know how President Biden views this, and it'll be interesting to see the contrasts that are drawn between the sitting president and the field of GOP candidates.
And as things change, as things develop and more stories come along and impact these candidates, both on the Republican side of the aisle as well as President Joe Biden, as well as other stories affecting Michigan politics and right here in Oakland County, we'll continue to go back to Dave Dulio from Oakland University. Dave, thank you so much for being with us this week.
Sure thing, Tyler. Thanks.
Your place to go for conversations about all things politics on the national and local level, especially as we get closer to the 2024 election and more discussions are held on campus at Oakland University, oakland.edu/CCE, to keep up to date with the Center for Civic Engagement. That is going to do it for this Wednesday edition of the Megacast. As always, you can keep up to date with us and find our full shows and each individual segment on demand on civiccentertv.com/Megacast. That's also where you'll find links to more original programming all about your hometowns, in your hometowns, from our partnering stations all across Oakland County and throughout the state of Michigan with our co-flagship at My Michigan TV. Big thank you to our crew, Anthony Juba, establishing our broadcast at Civic Center TV, our flagship this morning, and our director at My Michigan TV's studios in Troy, Michigan, Jared Clark. Until next time, I'm Tyler Kieft. Take care of each other, and we'll see you very soon.